Let's create the Google Snake game in Scratch. I'll show you how to program the controls, make the apples spawn randomly, and draw the sprites. Let's get started by creating the snake. To do this, we're going to make a circle. We can fill it in this color, and then to make the eyes, we'll create a circle with the outline the same color as the head, but this time with white fill. We can copy and paste this to make another eye that is identical. Then, when placing the eyes, use the background squares to try and line them up to make sure they are symmetrical. For the pupils, we can just use a darker blue. I found dropping the brightness to 75 works quite well for this. Then copy and paste this to make another pupil. And next copy and paste that one more time and make it smaller to create the nose of the snake, and then duplicate it to make it symmetrical. Finally, select everything and ensure it's centered on the canvas to make sure the code moves it properly. Also, make sure the snake is facing right to make sure our rotation lines up later. Now, to make the sprite for the tail, all we need is a circle. It's important to make sure this is similar size to the head, so use the dimensions in the top left to check they are close. If yours are too big or small, adjust it to make sure the numbers are similar. Also, make sure you have named your costumes appropriately, because this will help later on when we're using code to switch between the costumes. Now you should have a snake face and a snake body on two separate costumes. If you don't have either one of these, rewatch this section and come back when you have them. For the snake, we're going to need three variables. These will be the score, high score, and delay. The delay is going to help us generate the snake's body, so we can hide that one for now. You can also move the high score display to the other side of the screen so it's not in the way. To start coding, we're going to use a green flag click block. We can then add a move to set its coordinates to 0, 0, and a pointing directions block to point in direction 90. This will put the snake in the middle of the screen, pointing right, exactly how Google Snake starts. After that, add a reset block to reset the score to 0, as well as changing the delay to make sure it starts on 0.05. This will control the length of the snake, so you can tweak this later to make sure you get the right length of the snake you want. Next, switch the sprite to the head sprite we made earlier using the switch costume block, and ensure the snake is shown by adding a show block. After that, add a forever loop. This will control the main actions of the snake throughout the game. Inside that, we should have an if statement. The condition of the if statement should check if we are touching the edge, so we can bring a touching edge block in and place it in our if statement. If the snake is touching the edge, we should check if the current score is higher than the high score using a green comparison block. If it is, we can set a high score equal to our score variable. Below this, we should put a stop all and end the game. Outside that if statement, we should put a move steps block. I'll set mine to 5, but you can set yours to whatever you like. This block controls the speed of the snake, so the higher you set it, the faster it will move. However, I wouldn't really go higher than 20 steps. Finally, in this loop, add a create clone block and make sure it's set to myself. Now for the controls of the snake. If you want to keep it simple, you can simply place a point towards block and set the target to the mouse pointer. This will mean you can control the snake with the mouse pointer by putting the cursor where you want the snake to go. However, if you want a more authentic snake experience, delete that. Then drag in 4 separate key press blocks. We can set each one of these to the arrow key so the snake can go up, down, left, and right. Underneath each one of these blocks, we want to add a pointing direction key. Each block should then be set to the direction we want the snake to go to. You can see which direction it will go by using the direction selector that pops up when you go to set the direction. This was why it was important to make sure we set the snake towards the right when we are making the costume. Now it's time to generate the tail. We have already created clones of ourselves, but now we need to manage these into a tail. So we can drag out the when I start as a clone block, then underneath it we should switch the costume to the tail. After that, add a repeat block and make sure it's set to 10 repeats. We can then use a purple change color effect block to change the color by the delay variable, as well as a weight block to weight the length of the delay divided by 10. This should create a color gradient on the snake tail, which gets darker just like in Google Snake. After this loop, we can delete the clone with delete clone block. Now you should have a snake that can move around using the arrow keys or mouse if you decide to go that way. Now make sure it's turning in the right direction and that the tail spawns properly. If it's going the wrong direction, double check your movement blocks and the costume rotation. And if the tail isn't long enough or too long, then play around with the default delay value in the first block we made. Okay, now for the part to bring this all together to make it look properly like Snake. I've created a background that has the right size squares as well as being in the correct color that you can download below to skip the drawing stage, but I'll also show you how to draw it in Scratch. First, we want to go to the backdrop editor and draw a square. We can check the numbers next to the costume name to ensure we get this the right size. For this game, we want 20 by 20. It's important to get this right so the snake properly fits on the board, otherwise it may look off and cause problems with spawning the apples in. For the squares color, I found color set to 23, saturation at 79, and brightness at 85 works well. Now for the next tile, this should be the same color, but the saturation should be 85 and the brightness should be 83. Now that we have these two tiles, we can just keep on copying them. Once we get to the end of the line, we need to copy the whole line and then offset it it to get the checkered grid. Once this is done, we can copy both rows and continue copying it until we have the full background. Now, if you check your viewport, you should be able to see our snake and our new background. If something is missing or it doesn't look right, you might need to go back and check an earlier step. Now it's time to add the apple. It's the main objective in the game, so let's make sure we get this right. Just like before, I do have a finished sprite on the Google Drive link below if you want to save time, but I'll also show you how to draw it so you can customize it to make it your own. First, open the sprite editor and click circle. We can set the color to 3, saturation to the max, and brightness to around 68. Then we can draw a circle out. Next, we need to draw a smaller circle to make the shiny effect on the apple. We can do this using color 3, saturation around 68, and brightness at 100. Next, we need to draw the stalk. Draw a brown rectangle with color 7, saturation 56, and brightness 62. On top of that, add a small green ellipse using the circle tool to make the leaf using color 33, saturation to the max, and brightness 78. Now make sure the apple is centered in the editor because this is really important for the code to position the apple properly. Next, resize it to make it fit perfectly inside a grid square. This will be different for everyone depending on how big you drew your apple. Next, for the code, start with a when green flag click and then add a move to block. Inside the options of this block, we need to have a multiplication block with a random number block on one side and 20 in the other. Then duplicate this pair of blocks and put one group in each of the options. On the X side, set the random number range to -10 to 10, and on the Y side, set the block to -7 and 7. This will make sure apple stays on the grid and moves randomly. The higher you set the random blocks, the closer to the edge your apples can spawn, which can make the game harder. So if you want, you can choose what is best for your game. Next, add a show block so the apple becomes visible at the start of the game. After that, add a forever loop with an if statement. In this statement, add a touching block. This will run whenever the snake and apple are touching. Inside of that, we want to increment the snake score by 1 and increase the delay by 0.01. Okay, now finally, add the move block from above into here to make the apple move again randomly. Now you can test the game. If everything works, your apple should jump to a new square every time the snake touches it. The score should then increase and the snake should get slightly longer. If that works, we can move on to the next step, which is adding sound. If not, have a quick check of your blocks before continuing on. Now let's add the sound effects. These will greatly enhance the feel of the game and it will make it far more satisfying to play. I found a sound file online which contains a few useful effects all in one recording. You can use any effects file you like. In my recording, all the sounds are the same clip, so we're going to need to cut this down. To do this, we'll import it twice into the sound panel of the snake. This is because we're going to cut it to get 2 separate sound effects from this. On both of these, I'm just going to be trimming the sound down to get only the sound effect and delete everything else. I also gave them both names so they can be identified easier in the code. Next, go to each of your movement buttons and add a play sound block and set it to the name of the sound you have just made. Also get another play sound block and put it inside the if statement, inside the snake's main loop, play when the snake is touching a wall. This should play the game over sound. Finally, we can import the same sound file into the sound page of the apple sprite. We can cut this down to isolate only the sound we need. Then we can add another play sound block and put it inside the if statement of the apple. I set this block to also play the sound we want. This plays a chomp effect when the snake and apple are touching. Finally, test everything. You should hear a sound when turning, a chomp when eating, and a game over effect when the game ends. Once that is done, your game should not just look complete, it should feel it too. And there we have it, a fully functional snake game entirely from scratch. If you found this tutorial fun, interesting, or useful, please like and subscribe and leave a comment. From here, you can continue to experiment around with your snake game and change any of the values in the code to see how that affects the game. Or if you want something new to build, please consider checking out any one of my other Scratch tutorials.